I'm starting then. Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, so today, topic is sustainable development and introduction and principles of sustainable development, which is part of your course MSD 011, and I will be covering Unit 1 and 2. So I would like to start with this quote by Justice Mensah. Justice Mensah is a research fellow at the University of Cape of Hope in Ghana. And so I quote him: sustainable development has become the buzzword in development discourse, having been associated with different definitions, meanings, and interpretations. So the whole idea of sustainable development, it has a long, rich history, how it has evolved. And it is also rated by so many people like buzzword. And so this quote was very appropriate as I was going to discuss about the definition, its evolution, different meanings and interpretations. So Justice Mensah is a very young researcher based in Ghana. In the year 2019, he published his review article on sustainable development and in 2019, and this article within 2 years have fetched more than 345 citations, and it's one of the most cited literature currently in the world. So in today's counseling session, we are going to talk about the evolution of concept of sustainable development. I will also talk briefly about the pillars and dimensions of sustainable development. As the idea is big and the objectives are so big, so there are so many critics also who do not accept the definition given by the Brundtland Report or the World Commission for Environment and Development. So we'll also talk about that. So after the Brundtland Commission's report of 1987, this idea became mainstream, and still today, it's one of the most popular definitions given. And so many discourses have evolved since then. So we'll also cover some models, approaches, and key concepts which has developed after the Brundtland Commission's report. We'll talk about references and some readings, and then we'll take some question and answers. So as far as the evolution of concept of sustainable development is concerned, I'll quote Elkington 1999, quote, "While the evolution might seem unimportant to some people, it nonetheless could help predict the future trends and flaws and therefore provide useful guide and now and for the future." So sustainable development is very crucial. There is a lot of at stake for the future. There are a lot of criticisms. It has evolved over time, but these aspects need to be discussed. This is what Elkington means. So if you look at the concept as such, that's the concept. So it derives a lot from the discipline of economics. So the concept became mainstream after 1987, but before that, there were different issues which shaped and resulted in the development of sustainable development. One of two theories which are very popular is the Malthusian population theory. So here Malthus says, if I recall correctly, the Malthus says that the population of the world will progress geometrically, while the resources will develop at the arithmetic rate. So the result will be there will be enormous rapid rise in population, but we will not have sufficient natural resources to support this population. So that's why he posed a very crucial and critical question: will increasing population be supported by Earth's limited natural resources? Followed by that, there was also a lot of economists and researchers who talked about limits to growth, and one of them very popular is Meadows. In 1972, Meadows talked about limits to growth. He says, I quote, since the world is physically finite, exponentially growth of these three key variables, growth of population, industrial production, and pollution, would eventually reach the limit. So he also takes or borrows some of the ideas from Malthusian population theory that there is a rapid rise in growth of population, development is happening, and the industrial production will increase. At the same time, there was a lot of pollution also. So he was also including and talking about the limits to environment, that there will be some limits. And these are the basic ideas which today, as of now, in last 2 decades, we are talking about the carrying capacity, ecological footprints of Earth. So I think they borrow from these two theories. After that, Malthusian population theory is widely acclaimed. Limits to growth, Meadows is widely acclaimed. And after that, the concept of sustainable development, if I have to say that which is the first major breakthrough or recognition year, I will say it is the year of 1972 when the UN Conference on Human Environment was held in Stockholm. So the conference not explicitly recognized, but the international community of researchers, economists, they agreed that that development and environment, though two different issues, could be managed in a mutually beneficial manner. So this is the time that we need to talk about development and that too with relation to environment. So after 1972, I will say the evolution of the concept was almost reaching the peak, and I will talk about the other definitions and when the idea became streamlined in my next slide. So the idea of sustainable development, as I mentioned earlier, also it was the year 1987 when there was a commission, Brundtland Commission. She was the Prime Minister of Norway then, and it was the World Commission of Environment and Development. So that was the time that this idea became mainstream, and there was a full-fledged definition which was given by WCED, and it defines sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own. So within the concept, there was two key concepts or ideas, which were the focus of sustainable development report. The first was the concept of needs. That was particularly talking about the needs of the world's poor, and it mentioned that they should be given a high priority. Then the second was the idea of limitations imposed by state of technology and social organizations on environment's ability to present and the future needs. If you look at some of the critical objectives which WCED mentions in its 1987 report, it talks about several key issues like reviving growth, changing the quality of growth, meeting essential needs for job, food, energy, water, and sanitation, ensuring a sustainable level of population. This, if I may recollect in my earlier slide, the Malthus and Meadows also talked about. There should be a sustainable level of population. Just the way population is growing, if we do not do anything, it's not feasible for the future. We may get short of the resources. Then next, it talks about conserving and enhancing the resource base. Again, related to both these theories. Then reorienting technology and managing risk, how we are going to use technology. How we use the technology will also be crucial, and how much risk we are taking, that will also be crucial for sustainable development. Then it also mentions merging environment and economics in decision making. As I said earlier, development was the focus, environment was not given consideration, but now we are talking about economics, we are talking about social welfare, along with environment, that should be key part of the decision makers. And then lastly, of course, any country develops, it doesn't develop alone. There is an economic relationship among different countries that should also be the key objective of sustainable development. Now, we define what is sustainable development, what are the key objectives of sustainable development. But one may wonder what are the key dimensions of sustainable development, and it is also called pillars of sustainable development. It's also popular as triple bottom line model. If you look at figure 3, which Sarah I have taken from Sir Geldi in 1995. He presents the three-pillar model where we can see there are three circles. I've also talked about this in my earlier lecture. So it is at the intersection of social, economy, and environment. That it is an amalgamation of all three. We have to consider economy has to develop considering the environment and taking the social welfare in my mind. So we can say that environment is the necessary foundation for sustainable development, and economy is a tool to achieve sustainable development. Economic growth is essential. No country can develop without growth. So, but it should take care that it doesn't destroy its own resource base. Then, social, as I was saying, that you have to develop considering the environment, keeping in mind the social welfare. So that we can say that social means that this is a target for sustainable development. We have the provision for an environment in equitable growth for all in the society. Basiago in 1999, he gives a very nice hypothetical illustration where he's showing the interlinkages between the three dimensions or pillars of sustainable development. So I have quoted, it's a big line. I will just read the key points. So he says, if a man in a geographical area lacks a job, so that is the economic aspect, he is likely to be poor, and disenfranchised, which is aspect of social pillar. And when the person is poor and disenfranchised, he has an incentive to engage in practices that harm ecology. For example, by cutting down trees for firewood to cook his meal and warm his house, which has environmental complications. We know that a large part in India, for example, in rural areas, the poor people, they are dependent on the forest nearby. And there is a lot of activity, I will say construction activity. MNCs are putting up their plants, businesses are opening offices. For this, a lot of land is cleared, and in that, the forest areas are cleared, and that impacts environment. As the forest area is cleared, we also get short of land. Now the poor population, the rural people, they are dependent for their basic amenities, for example, wood and other things from the forest. So the area has decreased. They now have limited resources. So now for the survival, they will be using the resources, the limited resources. That is what he says that the they will engage in practices that harm ecology. Then he says, as his actions are aggregated with those of others in the region, cutting down trees, deforestation will cause vital minerals to be lost from the soil. So when vital minerals are lost from the soil, so they are taking food that is coming from that land, but that will be deprived of dietary nutrients. So that will impact the intellectual capacity, and because of that, when people are consuming, there will be decrease in the productivity, their performance of the productivity, so which has economic impact. And when the productivity stagnates or decreases, the economic aspect, the poor people will remain poor or poorer, and the cycle continues. This is what has also talked a lot about the intergenerational and intra-generational equity issues, which I will be talking in my next slide. So in 1987, that was a three-pillar model we are talking about. There are a lot of researchers who have worked on it, and one of the popular theories, they say that, for example, Lucas Sagazzo, he's an Argentinian economist. So he gave a five-pillar sustainability triangle model, and he says, no, we need to consider other aspects. For example, he criticized the 1987 definition of World Commission of Environment and Development. He said it's weak on territorial, temporal, and personal aspects of human development. So if you look at figure 2, The five-dimensional sustainability triangle. If you look at the inner circles, the three circles, they are permanence, place, person. So he says the first three dimensions belong to space, which are represented by X, Y, and Z, and the fourth dimension is person, where the this dimension represents the real objective and concrete things that exist in present time, and it talks about individual anterior human dimension. Then the last, that is the fifth dimension, is dimension of time, which Sugezo calls permanence. So it's an ideal abstract and subjective projection of events from other corners into the future. But still, the three-pillar model remains one of the most popular. Now, as I talked about the definition, the evolution of sustainable development, I also mentioned that the idea of sustainable development, the three pillars that the sustainable development is based on the economic, social, and environmental aspect. There were a lot of weaknesses and there were a lot of critiques of this idea. There were researchers, economists who said that there are loopholes we need to be addressed, and the world may not achieve sustainable development if we follow the path or the guidelines that were given by the Golden Report. It might serve as a base idea, a key idea, but we need different interjections and other ideas which make it more comprehensive. So some of the critics I have mentioned in this slide. So some of the researchers and economists say that the term development nor the needs have been well defined in the WCED definition. So they say that the needs might vary with a given situation. For example, needs of a developing economy like India and China might be very different than needs of a developed economy like United States, France, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada. So we have to focus on pathways which are conducive to a particular country's own growth path and requirements. We just cannot blindly take a particular idea and implement the same framework in all the countries. And it might also be difficult if the circumstances are different in the country or in a given situation. For example, the big question of the poor versus the rich. So in today's media and newspapers and articles, every year the Economist, the Times Magazine, and the United Nations, they publish their Human Development Report, and they talk that what is the poor population in the world and how much the riches own the resources or say the capital in the world, and what is the ratio of poor. So this figures is increasing rapidly, and there is a rapid rise in rich people, the billionaires in the world, and at the same time poor people owning property or wealth is decreasing every year. So was a key critique that the development has to talk about the needs of the developer and developing countries separately. They should inculcate and talk about the circumstances. For example, if we talk about India, so if you look, sustainable development should unequivocally address eco-friendly agriculture for a country like India, eco-enterprises for livelihoods and basic needs. We know that how much still India is having around, if I go with the recent census figures, so around 22 or 21% of the population still lives below poverty line. And number of riches and billionaires in India have substantially increased. The next key aspect of criticism about the WCED definition is the ASD frequently is interpreted as a simple process of change that can be continued forever. So many organizations and researchers portray that, yes, this is the only mean to achieve sustainability. Sustainable development is the ultimate mean. And it will continue forever. So that also questions back the hypothesis and the theories which I posed. The Meadows talked about limits to growth and the population, Malthusian population hypothesis. So sustainability cannot continue forever if we do not take actions and do some changes about different issues I was talking. So what Lele in 1991 proposed, he said that a distinction should be made between the objectives, what we want to achieve, what sustainable development wants to achieve, and the means, how we are going to achieve it. That should be clear in the development rhetoric. So if you look at figure 3, he gave a semantics of sustainable development very clearly defines that if you look at the top sustainable development, then there are two branches. There is sustainability and development aspect. So he is saying that these are two different discourses. So we should not just say sustainability, sustainable development, and development synonymously. These are all different terms, and we should have clarity and we should clarify them. For example, he talks about two concepts, the sustainability and development separately. Then he said that sustainability have three connotations. It has a literal meaning, ecological meaning, social meaning. Similarly, development has a connotative process and objectives, which he emphasizes. We need to talk about the developmental process and objectives of the development discourse. Then he says that it may have different meanings. For example, literal meaning sustaining anything. Sustainability may mean sustaining anything. Ecological sustainability, sustaining ecological basis of human life. Social sustainability may mean sustaining social basis of human life. Similarly, there might be different conditions when we are talking about sustainability. What are the ecological conditions? What are the social conditions we need to talk about? And the interpretation also may vary. So the idea he proposes is the right side, that we need to talk about the developmental process and objectives in with an aim to achieve sustainable development. So the sustainable development should talk about achieving traditional objectives. It should talk about the ecological and social sustainability objective. And this is also the mainstream and main idea which most of the researchers today carry, that we just need not to talk about the traditional way the SD has been defined in 1987 report. The developmental pathway for sustainable development should talk about very clearly about the key components of the process we are going to take, the objectives of it, and it should also inculcate the ecological and social aspects. The development should take into account the ecology with social welfare and equity in mind. Then one of the other critics of the 1987 definition was the existing technology-driven, profit-motivated market system is unlikely to help in the allocation of rapidly dwindling natural resources to future generations. So we talked about this example where I mentioned simple hypothesis case by Basiago, where he talked about the interlinkages between the three components, where he was talking about the intergenerational and intragenerational equity and allocation issue. For example, in India, with growing number of hungry people, because of result of declining rural means of livelihood, there is environmental degradation. So I said that poor people use the resources from the forest area. They are dependent on that. If that area is devoid, they are not provided the resources because of economic development, construction, and projects. The area decreases, and now they have limited resources. But because they have to survive, they will continue to eat, and that will have a damage for longer term. So it's not only the short-term damage happening, it's also the long-term damage happening. That's how intergenerational equity issue is being talked about, that the resources will dwindle and the future generation might not have adequate resources to survive and thrive. And intragenerational, within the community in present generation, we may not have enough resources. Another examples we may consider from manufacturing sector to understand this aspect. So we know that natural capital, which is low entropy, is converted to produce manufactured good, which is high entropy. I'm representing manufactured good as MC and natural capital as NC. So if we talk about the practice, today's generational practice, there is a high peak in producing manufactured manufactured capital, and it converts very useful natural capital into waste. So because of rapid industrialization, a lot of production is happening, and that is also turning a lot of a good amount of natural capital into waste. So what is needed is we need to restrict or balance the manufacturing capital, for example, consumer items, for short-term economic gains. We have to use our resources, the natural capital, very aptly and considering the future generations and current needs and requirements of the existing population and people across the globe. So that's how that, that covers the intra and the intergenerational issues. So Barbier, Edward Barbier is an economist. He is a very famous economist at, I think, University of Colorado Boulder. Yeah, he is at University of Colorado Boulder. So in 1987, just after the WCD brought its report, he said that I quote, "For economic development to be truly sustainable, it requires tailoring the design and implementation of projects to the needs and capabilities of people who are supposed to benefit from them." Now, with this, I have talked about the idea, the definition, what were the issues with the WCD definition, what were the critiques. Now, in this slide, there's a lot of figures if you look at. So I will take some time to discuss this in detail. So after 1987, the time when as the discourse became streamlined and throughout the world, uh, as sustainable development was looked at as the ultimate aim, the nations, whether they are developing, they are poor, they are developed, they have to follow the pathways and the guidelines, and different articles and issues were presented in that report. So idea became very popular, streamlined. But over a period of time, since there were a lot of criticisms, as I talked about, they were talking about the pollution problem, they were talking about the limits to growth, they were talking about the environmental considerations, they were talking about that there should be clarification between the developmental objective and the process we are going to take to achieve sustainable development. So with all these things going on, then different authors, researchers, and institutions across the world, they came up with a different, I will say, variety of ideas and variety of models, approaches, and concepts that this should be one of the ways to achieve sustainable development. Few of them I have discussed in my earlier lecture, so I will touch them briefly, but the references I have present, if you want to look into them into detail, you can surely have a look. So in 1994, if you look at the left at the top, the World Bank, they gave a capital stock model. So they were saying, they said that the idea was that the capital stock of sustainable development, it's a summation of three capitals. They were talking about capital stock of environment, the environmental stock, we can say environmental services, environmental resources like wood, leaves, and any other products that is coming from the environment, and ecosystem services like environment absorbs harmful gases and CO2 from the atmosphere. So it may be understood as capital stock of environment. Then they talk about capital stock of economy. Capital stock of economy are all the goods that are being produced. They may manufacture goods, for example, as capital stock, and then capital stock of society, the welfare part of the society, how society behaves. So he says that the capital stock of sustainable development depends on all three types of stocks, that is environmental stock, economic stock, and the societal stock. So just below it, then egg of sustainability model was given by IUCN. So it talks about the relationship between ecosystem and people. And if you look at the model, so it shows some of the flows comprising of stresses and benefits coming from ecosystem to the people. As I talked about the environmental resources and services, these are the benefits people get from the ecosystem provides to people. And then there are flows, stresses and benefits from people to ecosystem. For example, people also maintain ecosystem, so it might be a benefit. And the people also produce, for example, industries produce pollution, humans produce waste, so that might be treated as waste to the ecosystem from people. Then just below that, uh, there is also idea of weak sustainability and strong sustainability. It's a quite old idea, but it keeps taking shape in different forms over the years. Even today, people talk, researchers, economists talk about it. So if you look at the weak sustainability aspect, it's represented by a triangle where you can see the three dimensions of sustainable development, which is economy, society, and environment. So the idea of weak sustainability is that there can't be a substitution between the environmental capital and the economic capital, and also the societal capital. So one of them can substitute for other. So which was highly criticized, that yes, we just cannot replace for the economic gains at the cost of environment. So the notion was a strong sustainability, which is represented by a circle. If you look at the circle, the environmental circle is the largest one, then comes the society, and then comes the economy at the shortest one. So the proponents of strong sustainability, they say that for the economy to develop and thrive, and if you want to achieve sustainable development, the economy should focus on the welfare and equity aspect of the society, and that growth or development pathway should happen taking into consideration the environmental part. That's why the environmental part is the biggest circle. It's very critical for the economy to develop. Then if you move at the middle part and look at the top rectangle, it's represented as the prism model of sustainable development. I've taken it from Steinberg, 2001. So here again, they say that the sustainable development has four dimensions. So far I was talking about economic dimension, environmental dimension, and social dimension. So they say that it has also the fourth dimension, which is institutional dimension, which I talked about. It was used for a while, but then it was discontinued because it was very difficult to measure the institutional dimension in the form of rank or a score. So that's how it was discontinued after 2005. So Sandberg also talks about the four pillars in terms of mind, institutions, nature, and artifact. So it's just a change of terminology, and more or less the idea is the same. And these four dimensions. So the idea is that to achieve sustainable development, we have to make progress on all the four dimensions, and that's how we can measure progress towards sustainable development. And another thing is that sustainable development cannot happen only on the one of the pillars or two pillars. So we need a fair component or a balanced pathway of all the four dimensions. Then at the bottom of it, Kalman in 2014, he talks about four pillar model. where he is talking about sustainable communities. So he says that the sustainable community can develop and achieve sustainable development, taking care of the economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Then he also mentions cultural aspects. So this is also becoming a very streamlined topic of today's research in area of sustainability and sustainable development. That cultural aspects are also being talked about. That the culture also plays a very crucial role. For example, for countries like developing countries or poor countries where there are a lot of communities and different areas in hilly regions and say tribal population is there, and they are very much attached with their cultural and forefather parental practices. And so it says that we need to maintain those cultural pathways, the cultural habits of those communities, because the modern technology or modern development pathway may undermine, and there are a lot of benefits. And we know in different development, sustainable development discourse, I was talking about that the many of the tribal areas and tribal people or the hilly region people, they have wonderful ideas and have practice older practices which in fact support the environment, which maintain the ecology and do not degrade it. And look at the top right side, where I have mentioned twin concept model of sustainable development, which was given by CSTAC. So, so this I presented in my earlier lecture also, that they define sustainable development as the intersection of sustainability and human development. If I have to correlate this model, I will say in 1991 also, Lele, which I was presenting the semantics of sustainable development, he also broke down sustainable development into two parts. One was sustainability and another was human development. So I will say it's a more of a similar model, though, but it was only conceptual model. It was not very widely accepted. It was done by them at the request of the Ministry of Environment and Forests in the year 2011, but it was discontinued because ministry do not agree with the idea, because they have not given a model that was very applicable or shown the process. Then at the bottom right corner, you look at, there is a sustainability triangle model which was given by Von Hoff. This model was particularly given for India. So in this model, Von Hoff talks about 7 dimensions. He said that within the sustainability triangle, you can see society as the top, ecology and economy are at the base of it. So he talks about aspects such as natural basis of life, resource consumption, economic power, productivity of society, social engagement, and quality of life, and last about the populace. So if you have to compare also, you can see that here also aspects of productivity of society is coming up, quality of life is being talked about, which is all new area of research now, well-being and quality of life, natural basis of life, resource consumption. So you may connect them with the idea of that resource. We need to save our environment. Resources have to be saved for the future generations. The society has to be productive, and for that there should be equal welfare. What I was talking about, intergenerational equity, and social engagement. So I was saying that we need to include all parts of the society, the tribals and the people living in far-flung areas. Their engagement is also necessary. So we can connect that to other models and other theories also. So I think with this SD discourses and models, approaches, and concept post Berlin, So there are several other models which are coming up. I have covered few of them. So these are not the only models, but I have covered few, some of the popular and some of the recent ones. But if you look at literature, I think you will find almost more than 10, 20 other models what I have presented. But I think this gives a fair idea in this lecture that what sustainable development is, what are its key components, what are some of the objectives and goals of sustainable development, what we want to achieve from sustainable development, and how we are going to achieve, how people have proposed different models to achieve sustainable development. And one thing is to be taken into mind that whatever idea or concept is given, so that's some may be applicable, some may not be applicable, but still all of them have some shortcomings. No model is perfect, but that is how research, that is how the development path happens in the world, that is how evolution happens. I'm sure we will have more models coming up in area of sustainable development, which are robust, which are practical and applicable, and which take into account different aspects of sustainable development, the core ideas, the objectives, and the process we need to take. So that is all in today's lecture. These are some of the references I have used. I will suggest you all to go to some of these works if you want to understand some of the key topics in detail, which I have covered. So there is ample resources here. And some of the readings also, I will suggest have a look. There's also a video on concept of sustainable development in YouTube. This will also give you a good flavor of it. So that is all from my side. Now I'm open to questions.